Hi, my name is Amy Rutledge, and I'll be speaking to you today about institutional theory and agency theory and how these are reflected in Polk State College. So before we get into these theories, I think it's important to first define the term institution. So according to Open Education Sociology Dictionary, an institution is a large-scale social arrangement that is stable, predictable, created, and maintained to serve the needs of society. Institutional theory is based on the understanding that institutions must interact with their surrounding social systems. Polk State College is just one example of an institution that interacts with its surrounding social systems and is, in turn, affected by these interactions. Polk State College was created to serve the educational needs of those in Polk County, and we continue to do that very effectively. So institutional theory is founded on 3 pillars, and Richard Scott first introduced these 3 pillars in 1995, and the 3 pillars consist of the regulative pillar, the normative pillar, and the cultural cognitive pillar. So the regulative pillar consists of the rules, laws, regulations, and policies that institutions must comply with. These regulations may be put in place by the government, either federal, state, or local, or institutional governances such as the board of directors for our institution. Regulations and policies may dictate how an institution functions, where the institution can do business, or what an institution may produce. So regulations can actually be very restricting, but most people don't realize that regulations can also be very empowering, and it all depends on the scenario. Additionally, regulations can spur institutions to change. So, for example, Polk State College, as a member of the Florida college system, we're a publicly funded institution, and therefore we must comply with the rules and policies put in place by the State Board of Education and the state of Florida. So at one point during the pandemic, we had to change to a fully online institution. All education was provided through distance ed, whereas the policies changed for this school year, so now we're coming back where 46% of our courses are now back to face-to-face. The second pillar is the normative pillar. So according to Scott, the normative pillar includes both the social norms and the values of an institution. So the norms specify how things should be done to include appropriate ways to pursue goals and objectives such as fair business practices. Values, on the other hand, determine what is correct or morally acceptable. And when combined with standards, you can use values to you can use them as a point of comparison to compare and assess existing behaviors within the institution. So the combination of the norms and the values is what gives an institution its individuality, or what makes an institution unique, or some people have even been known to say it gives the institution its personality. According to Scott, those who embrace the normative pillar, theorists that is, who embrace the normative pillar, they tend to focus on emphasizing the stabilizing influence of social beliefs and norms on institutions. And I can see how this is true because Polk State, we have 5 core values, and our core values are service, integrity, knowledge, diversity, and leadership. And it is this set of core values that helps to guide our institution and provides a stable foundation upon which we continue to build. And it really creates that culture around our core values. The third pillar is cultural cognitive. So Scott defines the cultural cognitive elements of institutions as the shared conceptions that constitute the nature of social reality and create the frames through which meaning is made. Or more simply put, it's just the way of getting things done. So this pillar focuses on commonalities such as shared understandings or professional ideologies, cultural frameworks, shared or common values. The cultural framework of an institution can actually affect how that institution sits or fits within its society. And additionally, the culture cognitive pillar affects those who work within the institution. So, for example, individuals who work in the institution who are aligned with the cultural beliefs, they tend to be more competent, or at least feel more competent, and they tend to connect with others that they work with better. In contrast, individuals who are misaligned or at odds with the surrounding cultural beliefs of their institution, they tend to feel less competent in their abilities or their work, and they may be regarded as outsiders by others in the institution. There's those five core values of Polk State College that make up our college. That is part of the culture of our college. It really influences the culture of our college. So individuals who are hired into Polk State who are in agreement with those values will fit in very easily, whereas if we were to hire individuals who are not aware of the five core values of Polk State, who are not aware of our culture, and maybe not in agreement with that, those individuals will find it very difficult to connect with others within our institution, and they typically do not last very long at Polk State, and we've seen that a few times over the last few years. There's two dimensions to institutional theory, and the two dimensions are isomorphism and decoupling. But for the sake of brevity, we will focus solely on isomorphism, as decoupling does not really apply to Polk State College. So isomorphism is a process that causes an institution to resemble other institutions that exist within the same environment. So if you have multiple institutions, for example, higher education, within the same environmental conditions, they will over time begin to represent or resemble each other, and that is isomorphism. And speaking of colleges and universities, most of them are very similar in how they are structured and operate. Very similar in the same vein, most banks resemble each other in how they're structured and in their business practices. Is just an example of isomorphism in practice. So this concept applies to nearly every type of institution worldwide. And there's actually three types of isomorphism that we will discuss. So the first form of isomorphism is coercive isomorphism. And this results from formal or informal external pressures that are exerted on an institution. So these pressures may come from other institutions, that the affected institution is dependent on, or from cultural expectations within society, or even from stakeholders within the institution. This can also include governmental mandates, which regulate the institution and cause some level of similarity, such as banks have mandated regulations for financial reporting requirements. So that's kind of, it's a similarity that's found through all banking infrastructure, but that's simply a reflection of government mandate. In regards to Polk State College, we are accredited through SACS. So we will be somewhat similar to other institutions who are SACS accredited because we are all held to the same level of expectation. So as a coercive isomorphism, it can be negative, but generally speaking, it ends up being positive. Although we do see, as far as the cultural expectations of society in current times, that cancel culture is what people are calling it. That's just a negative example of coercive isomorphism. Mimetic isomorphism is the next one. And this occurs when institutions adopt the practices of other successful institutions, and that'll cause a notable resemblance between the two. So DiMaggio and Powell describe this as a process where uncertainty within an institution encourages imitation. And I find that interesting. So when the environment creates a level of uncertainty within an institution, that institution may begin to alter themselves or their practices to resemble other successful organizations within their field. And this, they may start to resemble other organizations that they might perceive as being more legitimate or more successful than themselves. We see this happen often with production of goods and products, but very similarly, higher education institutions might incorporate tactics that prove successful at other higher education institutions in the effort to increase their own performance level. And I think we've done that to an extent here at Polk State. We've seen other tactics or mechanisms used in other Florida State colleges that were successful there, and we've taken those and applied them to our own institution just for the sole sake of improvement. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. So mimetic isomorphism can actually be a very, very positive thing. The third source of isomorphic change is normative. So this form of isomorphism stems primarily from the professionalism of a company. So DiMaggio and Powell, they mentioned two aspects. There's two aspects of professionalism. There's the formal education, and then there's professional networks. So basically what they're saying is people from the same educational backgrounds or same formal educational backgrounds, they tend to approach problems in very much the same way. There's not a lot of diversity within their thinking. And then as these individuals socialize professionally, whether it be within their own company or institution, or perhaps at professional conferences, these conformities and similarities are then further reinforced. So this can also be created through inter-hiring between existing institutions. So hiring from similar institutions can actually encourage normative isomorphism. And the professional networks that are gained through working with others in the same industry, it tends to lead to similarities in behaviors and values and actions. And again, this can all be very, very positive. It just depends on how it occurs. So for example, if Polk State continues to hire people from high-performing higher education institutions, then there is a potential that we will begin to emulate those institutions as those individuals bring their values and actions and behaviors to our institution. However, again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because as long as we're hiring people from high-performing, very strong higher education institutions, then we're going to be bringing those values and actions to ours, which will only serve to empower us and help us to grow in a positive way. So in summary of institutional theory, basically institutional theory helps explain why companies adopt the same practices and start to kind of resemble each other. As far as a biblical worldview, I think it's important that we just remember that we all should be reflecting Christ, not just each other. So as long as we are reflecting Christ and we derive our regulations and norms and culture from Scripture, then we should begin to resemble Christ in our actions, and this will in turn begin to impact those around us. Agency theory is the other theory that I wanted to discuss with you today. So agency theory basically explains how to best organize relationships in which a principal determines the work while the agent does the work. So in this relationship, the principal hires an agent to do the work or to perform a task that the principal is unwilling or maybe unable to do. Another way to say this is the principals delegate decision-making to the agents. Now, principals can be shareholders, they can be top management, CEOs, even owners of institutions, whereas agents are essentially the employees who actually do the work. Agency theory assumes that both the principal and the agent or agents are motivated by self-interest. And this can lead to opportunistic behaviors. So when an agent's actions deviate from the principal's interest, it can lead to what is known as agency loss or agency problem. The greater the deviation between the principal's and the agent's interests or goals, the more the institution stands to lose. So therefore, it's very important that the principal and agent actually share common interests, goals, and desires in order to minimize agency loss. And relating this to Polk State, we can consider the principal as our governing board and the college president, and our agents as the staff and faculty. And I cannot stress the importance of hiring faculty and staff who are aligned with or share the goals of Polk State College. And by doing this, our school will be able to continue to grow and expand with minimal agency loss. And it's when we hire these individuals who are not aligned with our institutional mission and core values that we begin to feel the strife and see the effects of agency loss, or begin to see that deviation between the agents and the principals, which causes issues, right? And then as far as monitoring, agency theory proposes that agents will be motivated by personal interest and or personal gains. And so again, this can be detrimental to an institution should the agent pursue their own interests at the cost of the institution. In order to minimize this issue, agency theorists suggest principals utilize a form of monitoring and incentives. So most higher education institutions utilize performance evaluations and student surveys as the monitoring mechanisms. And Polk State requires performance evaluations for both their faculty and their staff to ensure our employees are meeting the expectations set forth in our contracts. Polk State also uses student perception of instruction surveys to monitor the effectiveness of our professors and to ensure that students are continuing to receive the best education possible. And we also utilize some level of performance-related pay through annual increases, overload pay, and bonuses for working above and beyond what is expected. And I believe all these mechanisms have proven very effective in holding the staff and faculty to high expectations and increasing our staff and faculty's motivation to meet and surpass the expectations of the college. However, there's a couple of issues with agency theory. So one is the assumption that everyone is motivated solely by self-interest to the point of putting their interests above those of the institution as a whole. And I think it's important to note that not everyone is selfish. There are many here at Polk State who put the students first and work with a very moral responsibility to serve the students to the best of their abilities. And I think it would be wrong for us as a college to assume that every employee puts their personal interests above those of the student. The other issue is the potential for incentive mechanisms to fall short. And these mechanisms can cause employees to focus on the money instead of the task at hand. I think it's important that we review our incentive mechanisms regularly as a college to ensure that we are not motivating employees solely through pay. And further, we need to ensure our compensation incentives are fair and appropriate, and that we're not pushing quantity over quality. I think if we get our incentive mechanisms correct and keep them online, then we will just continue to grow and improve as an institution. As far as a biblical worldview regarding agency theory, there's a lot of biblical applications that can come from agency theory, but I'm just going to focus on two. First is, I think it's important to be good stewards. We've been entrusted with funds from our students and from the state. Many of our students come from extremely poor backgrounds, and so I think it's our duty to serve our students to the best of our abilities so that they may receive a quality education that will help them climb out of poverty and set them on a road to success. We have seen so many amazing success stories come out of our school, and I believe it's due in part to our faculty and staff being such good stewards of what we have been entrusted with. And the other aspect is, I think it's important that we not be selfishly motivated, but instead seek to serve others. And I just pray that we continue to serve our students and see their value and their worth. It is the servant leadership and the servant heart of our school that makes Polk State College a great place to work and a great place to receive higher education and vocational training. So in conclusion, Polk State College is doing really well despite the ongoing pandemic. Isomorphic change has led us to emulate other successful higher education institutions, and that's actually proving to be a very good thing. Our core values create a very healthy culture, which helps our employees pursue excellence in servant leadership. I believe we continue to lay a strong foundation for future growth at our institution. Our performance evaluations continue to be very effective in monitoring our faculty and staff performance, and there has not been a lot of complaints about that mechanism from anyone. However, recommendation, I do think we need to continue to evaluate our incentive mechanisms just to ensure that they remain fair and effective. But on a whole, I think we're doing very, very well. I can see these theories represented in our institution, and I think they're being represented in a way that's very positive and not negative. So thank you for your time and attention during this presentation. As always, all questions and feedback are greatly appreciated. Thank you very much.